but just to make the PowerPoint of what they want the university to look like. They paid that group of 8 people $1.2 million to do that.
Wow.
That's all. So that's what I'm saying. The university just throws money wherever they want to throw it. So the fact that they don't want to pay us, they don't want to pay the workers, it's not about them claiming to be broke, but they're trying to redefine the hierarchy and the structure of value at universities and say that workers, not just grad employees, but building service workers, non-tenure track faculty, and undergraduates who work horrible jobs for little pay do not deserve to be at the table to bargain our own material needs. Plain and simple. They're trying to set that standard plain and through by busting our union.
Well, what it sounds like to me they're doing is they're trying to make public institutions look a lot like those for-profit universities that are screwing people over left and right. And good on you guys for standing up and stepping forward. Last question I've got for you. What can we do to help? What can people in other universities do to help? What's the ask?
Sure. The big ask, of course, is to call the provost and chancellor and just ring their phones off the hook and let them know what you're doing is wrong and that GEO has all the support that they need, and we are ready to fight this out until forever if we have to. We also need more bodies on the picket line. You can never have enough people on the picket line because we're shutting buildings down every day, and we want to keep shutting them down as time goes on. So that's the big thing. So coming down on the picket lines with us between 8 and 5 o'clock every day would be wonderful. And the last thing is to donate to our GoFundMe. That's been growing just exponentially with the support. And you just type in GEOUIUC GoFundMe, and the Strike Fund link will pop up for the GoFundMe, and you can donate directly to it. They're already trying to intimidate our members and trying to scare them out of striking. All kinds of nasty stuff that administrations do when employees exercise their legal right to strike. They're trying to do. So that's why our Strike Fund continues to grow to support our membership to make sure everybody is protected and taken care of. And so, yeah, those are the big asks that we need. Solidarity, just plain and simple. We need solidarity, and we need words to spread. Everybody needs to know about this, is that we have put public education on our back. And that this is going to be the pathway to making sure that you have access to higher education for all levels of people and not just the rich.
Good stuff, Gus. I appreciate the time. I wish you the best. We stand in solidarity with you, and please come back again as this continues so we can keep up to date.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Love the show. Thank you so much.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, Gus Wood. Again, we'll get some links at thericksmithshow.com and tweet out how you can help. I'm going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The Tories have come, but there's no improvement. Never cross a picket line. Now where is the might of the Labour movement? Never cross a picket line. You must never cross a picket line.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1932, forever remembered as a tragic day. The nation was in the grip of the Great Depression. As the economy languished, car sales plummeted by 80%. Thousands in Detroit found themselves out of work. Bread lines in the city grew longer with each passing day. The city's Unemployed Council and the United Auto Workers came together to discuss a response to the crisis. They decided to organize a march to the Ford River Rouge plant. At that time, Henry Ford was one of the wealthiest people in the world. The crowd of as many as 5,000 workers assembled at the city's edge. They had with them a list of 14 demands, including a return to work, the right to unionize, and an end to discrimination in hiring. As the marchers reached the Dearborn, Michigan auto plant site, they were greeted with tear gas shot by police and company security forces. Some of the workers responded by throwing dirt clods and rocks. The police retreated, then regrouped to aim fire hoses at the demonstrators. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire filled the air, and in a hail of bullets, 4 marchers fell dead. A 5th later died from his wounds. The Ford March had turned into a bloody massacre. More than 60,000 marched in the funeral procession for the slain workers who lie in solidarity buried together. The 5th, Curtis Williams, an African-American, was refused burial in the city's segregated cemetery. The workers hired an airplane and spread his ashes over the Ford plant. The sacrifice of these men have not been forgotten. Over the next decade, the auto industry became one of the strongholds of U.S. labor organizing, helping to raise the living standards of all workers. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. I gotta tell you, I can't get it out of my head. $3.5 billion endowment. And yet, as Gus points out, their demands are just a little over $2 million to make sure that every graduate employee there has health care, a reasonable wage, a bit of job security. But again, I think Gus made this very clear. It doesn't seem to be about the money. It seems to be about the power, the control, you're going to do what we tell you, when we tell you, how we tell you, and you will have no say. And that is really what all of this anti-labor stuff that's going on, all the right to work, the Janus case, all of these preemption laws, and all of this stuff to restrain and restrict and really to hold helpless working people across this country. And, I got to tell you, I'm thrilled by the fact that you had 20,000 teachers in West Virginia take to the picket lines. I'm thrilled by the fact that Arizona, Kentucky, Oklahoma, states that you would have never imagined talking about that kind of labor action. And then you see here where Gus is at the University of Illinois at Urbana and Champaign. This solidarity. And the thing that's exciting to me about it is it's filtering down to the next generation. It's exposing the next generation to direct action, to peaceful civil disobedience, in that collectively people organizing, standing together, have real power. That's why I hope people will stand with these graduate assistants, because I think Gus is absolutely right. If they get away with it there, it becomes the model for everywhere else. One of the things that, back during the tax fight that was going on, if you remember, one of the things Trump and the administration wanted to do was to tax the tuition benefits that these graduate assistants get. Now, understand, they get their tuition, and, it used to be that was it. You got a small stipend or something. And now they're saying, hey, look, this is our job. We've got to show up and we've got to teach these classes and we got to do all this work. We should be able to at least put a little food on the table. Because in the past, what they would do is they had to borrow a little bit of money. But as we've shifted the burden of paying for education from, corporations and we, the taxpayers, onto the backs of the students, it's becoming harder and harder to do this stuff. A friend of mine who used to be the president of APSCUF here, the union that represents the professors at the state universities and the faculty here in Pennsylvania, he said that, back in the 80s, back when, I was going to college, the state picked up about 2/3 of the cost of an education. The state, local tax base, businesses, all that. The student picked up about 1/3. Today, that number is 75% picked up by the student. You want to talk about a massive, massive redistribution of wealth. We're no longer taxing the big corporations. We're no longer taxing the very wealthy. We've created the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization. And how did we do it? We did it by saddling Gus and graduate assistants there where he's at and across this country with massive debt. Every person who goes to college now, massive debt. In fact, not just massive, but almost generational debt. I had a friend, a number of years back who, in fact, helped start this radio program with me. He and his wife were in excess of $200,000 in debt. And yet they were making, I think she was making in the 40s and he was making low 50s. And you go, how do you pay that kind of, it's more than a mortgage. In fact, it was more than their mortgage. That's a lifetime payment of debt because you wanted to get an education. And what's happened in this country is anyone who wants to get that education, we now penalize. And then if you can't afford it and you don't afford it, then we're going to blame you for being poor and blame you for not being able to get those middle-class jobs that are going to hopefully be there if and when you graduate. What's interesting to me is there's an awful lot of people who have college degrees saying you want fries with that. There are an awful lot of people with college degrees and advanced degrees working construction, driving trucks, because the jobs aren't there. But they were told, you saddle yourself with a lifetime of debt, you'll have a job. Something seriously wrong, which is why like I said, I'm thrilled to see these folks standing up and fighting. And obviously the next fight is as well with the adjuncts and all of the outsourcing that's going on at our colleges. The sad reality is our colleges and universities are now turning into for-profit centers like those fly-by-night things who have been just bilking students for an entire generation now. Sad stuff. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast there at thericksmithshow.com or get the app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. If you're listening on a station that only picks up the first hour, feel free to head on over to thericksmithshow.com for hour 2. Everyone else, stick around. Right back after this.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Talked about this a little bit yesterday. The former Russian spy and his daughter evidently poisoned, and they're saying attempted murder, attempted assassination, along with a police officer who first responded. He's in bad shape too. But again, this is one of those things that I keep asking the question. Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, the rest of the Trump speakers, the rest of the birds who might be singing, don't go walking near any open windows or don't breathe anything in. It's just amazing stuff. And here to talk about this and a whole bunch of the stuff that's breaking today, we've asked our good friend Sarah Kendzior back to give us some of her thoughts, share some of her rage, and bring us back up to date. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So what do we make of this? What do we make of this assassination attempt?
Yeah, I mean, we've had I think it was Clint Watts that said, a long trail of dead Russians since this campaign basically got underway, especially since Trump won. And, of course, this also follows in the path of Litvinenko and other assassinations that have been carried out of Russians on British soil. We know that Putin and the Kremlin and, his circle of mobsters and oligarchs and assassins knows no boundaries. It's not just the internet where they're transgressing over state lines, but in real life as well. And, this is a very disturbing case. We don't know what kind of chemical was used. We know that it was dangerous enough that it hurt not only him, but his daughter, who is possibly also a target, as well as the police force. And we also know, I believe at this time, that this is someone who worked with Christopher Steele. So there seems to be some kind of political motive, some kind of political message aimed at warning Steele or others who may have cooperated with Steele in his intelligence assessment.
Do you think this all ties together? This isn't just Putin paying back this Russian spy?
I mean, well, first, we don't know exactly that
Right.
it's Putin and the Kremlin. I mean, of course, this is, very, very reminiscent of their tactics, and he would have motive, but, a lot of people have motive at this point to send a message to steal. There are a lot of people within the U.S. And in other countries who are implicated in this international crime scheme that's posing as a White House administration. And so I could see a number of players getting involved, and, maybe the actual hit was carried out by Russians because, as I said, there's precedent for this. This is reminiscent of their tactics. But we don't know for sure. It'll be interesting as the information comes out, as they are able to maybe track what kind of substance was produced and, where those sorts of substances are produced, then we may have a clue as to who's behind it.
Now, did you also see the story today that just broke, the Washington Post pointing out that Erik Prince, the meeting that he had on the island with the Russian diplomat, I guess, there's someone who's now saying that was all prearranged and it was meant to create a back channel. It wasn't just a happenstance kind of meeting.
Yeah, I saw it. I also saw it in April 2017 when it was originally reported. Like, this is driving me nuts, This is like deja news, every day. It's like I said last week, like, the stories that we were discussing. I mean, I saw an interview between you and me about this story.
Right.
In real time for the last 2 years are being presented in the Mueller investigation. And, they're not revelations to anyone who's been paying attention. It was not some obscure place that I procured this information. It was in the Washington Post. I reposted the article today. I'm sure Mueller was aware of it, and it's just getting attention because there's now, new witnesses and new people who can validate this information, which is good, but it doesn't change the fact that if they are doing things like setting up these kind of back channels with this level of audacity, and that they did it and we were aware of it for a full year now, and nothing has been done to Erik Prince. Nothing has been done to stop any of this, what appears to be illicit collaborations, trading of state secrets, serious violations of national security. When you add up the cumulative effect of that, we are in such enormous trouble. Like, it's not like Mueller is going to flip a switch and everything's going to go back to normal. The damage that's been done already is incalculable. And the more we learn about, how flagrantly they've behaved, even after these violations have been reported, is an alarming sign because it means that they feel like they have impunity. They're not worried about Mueller's investigation. They're not particularly concerned. And, I don't know exactly why they would be, since they've been able to carry out, their kind of criminal acts in plain sight for a full year. I hope that the hammer ultimately falls and that it falls hard, and that's obviously going to be a very tumultuous time. So in another sense, I dread it. But this kind of, going back in time, this like Groundhog Day of espionage, like, I've had enough,
No, I'm right there with you. And it's amazing to me because we keep seeing these latest breaking news of things that we already knew, as you pointed out. And I just find it, is it that our media wasn't really paying attention, or is it that, we weren't paying attention?
I have no idea because I'm just kind of like, dumbfounded every day. Like, half the time I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to write about anymore because I already wrote the article. So I just sort of, rebooted or whatever. I'm like, yeah, hey, I wrote this back in July. And people are like, whoa, holy shit. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't supposed to say it. Gee whiz. Trump's been in bed with the Russians, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. I mean, there are people in the media who are doing a good job, who have been following the story consistently and who've been paying attention to all these small details. Like, and that's good. And the media is who I hold accountable here. I don't think that an average citizen in the United States could possibly keep up with this story unless they have incredible amount of time on their hands. I mean, it's a very consuming thing. Every day we've got like a week's worth of news. So I can't blame people for, not knowing all the information. And it's not like it necessarily makes a difference practically that everybody should be informed on like, the minutia of Erik Prince or something. But it is frustrating. It's frustrating that things are presented as revelatory or new because I think it creates a sense of false hope. I think it creates a sense of false expectations. People think, okay, this is the end. They're not kind of thinking broadly. They're not thinking cumulatively. And they're ignoring that, as this goes on, there are all these day-to-day crises that are being enabled just by the presence of this administration, which should have been taken out a long time ago because we knew all of this. We knew this during confirmation hearings. There's stuff about Tillerson this week, about how he was selected by Putin. It's like, gee, do you think like the Order of Friendship medal he received maybe gave that away? Or the fact that his predecessor for that position, the person they wanted before him, was Dana Rohrabacher, who's known for having absolutely no skills other than being a Kremlin lackey? Like, this is pretty cut and dry. It was even discussed at the confirmation hearings. Rubio and McCain, they brought all this up. They basically were kind of insinuating that Tillerson was, working more for Exxon and working more for the Kremlin than for America. And then they went ahead and confirmed him anyway. And that kind of thing, that just sums up the whole process of how they operate. They know full well what these guys are doing, what their actual goal is, and they allow it. And, we've discussed before the many things that go into this, the careerism, the opportunism, the possibility of threats, of blackmail, of bribery, and on and on and on. But it doesn't change the outcome. And the outcome, is what is incredibly damaging for Americans, for our national security, for our sovereignty, and for the future. And we lose that future every day that we refuse to confront what actually has happened in the past.
Yeah, it's like every day there's a new thing to get excited about. The other day, I'm sure you saw Nunberg. Everything was Nunberg. And then, screw it, I'm not testifying. And then he backtracks.
Yeah, the Nunberg stuff, that drove me nuts because Nunberg is a protege of Roger Stone. And this is the kind of thing that kind of blows my mind with the media, is that Roger Stone is, not a subtle guy. He's basically someone who, has created a caricature of himself so that he can, not be kind of accused of exaggeration. Like, I think that's what confuses people, is that he's so out in the open about everything he does. He literally produced a documentary about himself in which he lays out his self-proclaimed dirty tricks. And he's like, here's how I trick the media. Here's how I screw over the legal system. And when Nunberg came out, it was basically, like he'd gone to Roger Stone University and was like doing his oral exam on national television stations. Like, it was so blatant, that the goal of this, the outcome of this, was to make the investigation seem absurd, to make himself seem ridiculous, to make himself seem like an unreliable witness, maybe somebody who's, struggling, mentally, which maybe he genuinely is. Maybe Stone encouraged him to go out there because he knew that this is an unstable person, so that is a defense in its own perverse way in the court of public opinion. It's also possibly a legal defense. And then, of course, he, flirts with this idea of refusing to follow up on a subpoena, of disregarding the law. It's very flagrant, it's very flamboyant, and it captured their attention. And to me, I was just like, this guy is stunting. Like, this is just, like a classic Roger Stone technique. Meanwhile, Roger Stone is like hanging out with Julian Assange and again flaunting this in front of our face. And that was, once more, I keep coming back to the fact that, everyone looks back to 2016 and is like, oh my God, all the terrible things that were happening. Like, can you believe about, this illicit meeting or this illicit contact or, transfer of information? I'm like, it's happening now. Like, look at Roger Stone and Assange. What do you think they're talking about? What do you think they're doing? Do you really think that his contact, either their contacts with the White House or their access to intelligence ends? And, that's going on as Nunberg went on TV, and it was frustrating. The first interview, that Katie Tur one was interesting, and I thought she did a good job. But when he was on for the fifth time, I was like, oh, God. This is just like literally out of a playbook. The dude who wrote the playbook has given you, instructions onto his own schemes. Just watch that and learn something and try to see through, some of these obvious methods of manipulation.
Yeah, after the first statement, I'm going, this guy's a quack. Either he's a quack or this is a massive diversion, or he's just trying to find his way to the nut house, because nobody comes out and says, screw you, I'm not going to adhere to this subpoena. Nobody does that unless they've got something of a death wish.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't so much a diversion as it was a restructuring of the narrative. I mean, I think it was aimed more at the American public than it was at Mueller, because, of course, he ultimately did cooperate. I think it was meant to confuse people. You know, there are a lot of people who are still struggling with the fact that this happened. And, of course, narrative of, you know, Donald Trump was elected with help from, you know, Kremlin secret agents sounds absolutely bizarre. I mean, even, you know, now that we know that that is basically what happened, you know, I mean, it just sounds like a Mad Lib you pulled out from like 1986 or something. And so I understand why people are, you know, still struggling to come to terms with the details of all of this. But I think that, you know, Trump's team capitalizes on that confusion. You know, there are methods that are about flipping the script entirely. You see this on Fox News, where they try to pin everything on the Democrats or on Obama. But then there's just sort of muddying the waters, making everyone seem unreliable, making it seem farcical. Like, you now have this picture, Mueller actually sitting down with Nunberg and trying to have some kind of coherent conversation. And you think, you know, this is the guy that Mueller is getting his information from. I mean, that's the idea that people like Stone would like to put in people's heads. And the next day, Nunberg admitted it. He was like, yeah, this was like a scheme, you know, that Roger and Stone and I came up with. And I was like, okay, well, great. You know, I guess you admitted it, so we don't have to wonder what your motive was anymore. But I do wish people had cut on to that at the time.
Yeah, I'm with you. But, you know, and I think a part of that is also the frame that we're getting, that the White House is under absolute chaos and that they're incompetent. They don't know what they're doing. And there's some of that, absolutely. But there's almost like an evil genius to it, if you would.
Yeah, they know what they're doing, and part of what they're doing is using chaos as a cover for corruption. I mean, corruption is what you need to look at, and, you know, to his credit, you know, I think Mueller does a good job. You see in these indictments an emphasis on things that are traceable, on financial transactions, on, you know, recorded conversations, things that are tangible proof and not this sort of more amorphous zone of, you know, propaganda and, you know, other things that the media emphasizes. But yeah, this chaos thing has been put out as an excuse for Trump's clear-cut violations of the law, and those of others in the administration, by Michael Wolff, by a number of pundits last year. It's this whole idea of like, oh, he's too dumb, you know, to know what he's doing, or they're too disorganized to pull this off. And I'm like, you know, do you have any, like, knowledge at all of, you know, the mafia of criminality? Like, you don't need to be a genius to be a good criminal. You need to know, you know, exactly how much you need to know to get away with things. You need to know loopholes. You need to know spin. You know, you don't need to have conventional kind of geopolitical wisdom, and you don't need, and it's not desirable, to behave in a conventional way. And Trump has always been very good at creating this constant media circus around himself. He's been doing it since the 80s. At this point, I think it's really second nature to him. But again, look at his mentors and his friends. They distinctly tell you that this is our bag of tricks. People like Roy Cohn or Roger Stone will be very upfront. Like, yes, chaos and, you know, media domination and conflicting narratives are tactics we use to confuse the American public. You know, everybody talks about Russian active measures when they're analyzing propaganda, but you really need to situate that kind of those kind of active measures in an American framework. And that framework is basically infotainment. It's our 24-hour news cycle. It's people like Nunberg who are kind of, you know, self-destructing instant celebrities that will capture the public's eye and will make them, you know, look at things in a more superficial way. You know, they'll ignore the corruption behind it, the corruption that really does affect our daily lives, because it is our tax dollars that are going to pay these fools. You know, it's our money in our country that they're abusing to carry out these crimes. And so we should care in a fairly immediate way, but they want it to be a game. They want it to be a circus. And that's the kind of enticement that they use. And, you know, meanwhile, you've got like a bunch of back channels connecting people to the Kremlin and to illicit financiers as we're watching, you know, the reality TV show play out on multiple cable news channels.
Yeah, so, and at the end of the day, again, it's the kleptocracy, stupid.
What?
It's the kleptocracy, stupid. Is basically what you're saying. Pay attention to what's being stolen.
That's what I've been saying from the get-go. I mean, it's enormously frustrating. Like, back in November, I remember having to struggle to communicate to people that this was going to be a kleptocratic administration. And I thought as kind of a baseline, kind of argument, people would at least accept that. I understood they didn't believe me on Russia yet, but it's like, come on, man. Like, look at Trump's entire career. Like, what do you think he's going to do differently? And he already had announced, a number of things that are warning signs of that, like installing your family members in the administration. But I don't know. People just had a lot of faith. They had a lot of faith in institutions and checks and balances that was extremely unwarranted for our era.
Yeah, I'm with you. I wanted to get your thoughts on the musical staffer thing that's going on. I mean, last year, I got something like 37% of Trump's administration, that kind of turnover, where you had, I think Clinton had 11, Obama had 9, and Bush had 6. And the latest one, this Hope Hicks, evidently she told the House Intelligence Committee that she couldn't produce her emails because they were hacked.
Yeah, everybody's got an email problem. She's got hacked emails. Jared has a private server. Yet, mysteriously, there's not an outcry as there was over Hillary's. I mean, with Hope Hicks, there's a number of possibilities going on. I mean, one is that she was hacked, which is bad in and of itself because it speaks us to a broader security issue that I do think is present in the White House. I also think that I was hacked is kind of the modern version of putting your papers in a shredder. It opens up all sorts of possibilities for her to deny she received emails, deny she sent emails, deny that things written in her name were actually hers, talking about ones that are lost. My hope is that Mueller's team has procured these emails anyway, and that if she's going to be further interrogated as a witness, that it's going to be to test whether she's going to, talk in a forthright way about what the government has done or risk perjury charges. Like, I'm hoping that that's what's going on. But yeah, and, I have no sympathy for Hope Hicks, like not, a ounce in my heart. I can't believe it when I see these people blathering on like she's some child who didn't know what she was doing. She's 29 years old. She's been a friend of Jared and Ivanka for 10 years. She knows what they're about. She knows what Trump's about. She was in with the campaign from the beginning. She chose to go down this path, to back a white supremacist, to back a kleptocrat, to help him, to lie for him, to cover for him. And whatever happens to her, assuming there is some kind of repercussions, which would be a novelty for our time, she deserves it. This was a choice, and she made a terrible choice.
I'm with you, but one of the Twitter comments caught my attention, and Jim Convey says it's starting to seem that the only email server that wasn't hacked was the one Hillary Clinton's basement. Yeah,
I've thought about this, to be honest with you, and I don't see it remarked upon that much, in part because I think you start going down conspiracy theory lane. But, it is interesting to think about because from what we know, this was a long-term plan, by the Russian government, this elevation of Trump, the election interference. And of course, we've known about WikiLeaks for a long time, and both Assange and Putin were enemies of Hillary Clinton. We also know that there were odd things going on within the U.S. government. Hillary, if you've read her book, is quite angry with Jim Comey, angry with the New York FBI, kind of implies that things, were not running in an honest manner in that particular division. And so I kind of wonder whether, given all that, given that she knows there's a vendetta against her and that there would be people out to hijack, her life as well as her campaign, whether this was not just sloppiness, but maybe a conscious decision. I mean, I have no idea. I also know Hillary Clinton, at least during her run as Secretary of State, was not particularly adept. I remember her at technology and at discussing technology. I remember her talking about Twitter, clearly not understanding how it works. So, I may be putting a little too much, speculation into thinking that this was intentional, but it's certainly interesting because, she's basically the only one whose emails remain safe. The DNC, the RNC, people in the White House now, they've all been compromised. They're all vulnerable, and Hillary has remained immune.
Yeah, it's interesting. Margaret Jones asks, did Hope Hicks tell the FBI she'd been hacked when Mueller's team interviewed her in February? And that's an interesting question. When you got hacked, did you tell somebody?
Yeah, that's a great question because, protocol would designate that you go to the FBI. And of course, it's hard to kind of tell what's up with the FBI nowadays. They fired Comey. I don't quite know what to make of Wray. I don't know what the FBI would do if Hope Hicks went to them and said that she'd been hacked, but, that is what she should have done. And so, I do think obviously it's something Mueller is going to look into, and hopefully we'll have an answer. I don't know that it's some kind of answer that would immediately be put in the public domain, as this is an ongoing investigation.
Yeah, interesting. Let me ask you a couple of other quick things from the Twitters. Sandra asked, the current climate in our country, from the political to the social, is akin to the events right before the downfall of every great civilization. Do you think America's time is up?
I've kind of been thinking that for a while. I don't mean that in the sense of there will literally not be a United States of America. I think if something like that is going to happen, it's, more into the future. But we've been falling apart as a country for the last, 18 years. We had 2 wars. We had a massive recession. That recession produced a completely unstable economic system that was always presented as cyclical, just wait it out, the jobs will come back, et cetera, et cetera. But it was really a restructuring. And I think that combined with social media, with rapid changes in technology that have helped break down already eroding social trust, that have transformed the way that businesses work, the way we communicate with each other, it's a lot. And, we're not unique. This is happening all over the world. You're seeing huge changes in political systems. You're seeing a lot of democracies turning into autocracies or just becoming kind of, internally torn apart at the seams. I think, the world is kind of having a collective breakdown, and, we were a superpower, so we have basically a super breakdown. There are things about this that do remind me of the collapse of the Soviet Union, but I do think that that's a fairly facile comparison, just because the way the Soviet Union was put together, the way that the republics within it joined and were kind of constructed and built up, there's all these, it's a very long story. If you want me for a separate show about that, I can do it, because this is what I did my PhD on. It's quite different. And so when those republics declared independence, it is a completely different idea, because they were subjects of imperialism, different languages, different cultures, all these things, than if, one of the United States were to break free. It's just, not even break free, I should say break off, because I'm not really thrilled about these, CalExit and Texit kind of movements.
Right.
I would guess we're going to remain as a country, but it's just going to be extremely challenging.
Yeah, I think she just wanted a yes or no, but that was great. A good answer.
Sorry.
And the final one from the Twitter, has a dictator ever been removed from power without casualties? I guess we're looking down the road if Trump doesn't relinquish power when impeached or whatever happens. I guess that's part of it. Ever?
There's always some casualties, without mass casualties, sure. Like the Velvet Revolution was called that for a reason. If you look at what happened in Eastern Europe in 1989, with the exception of, Romania and Ceausescu, it was a fairly peaceful process. And Trump he is a autocrat, but he's still constrained in many ways, though it doesn't seem like it at times, by democratic rules and laws. He hasn't, completely consolidated power. He's on his way, and so he's not as fierce an adversary in certain ways than these kind of entrenched dictatorships that you saw, in the Soviet Union and its satellite states, or in other long-standing repressive societies that did not have a democratic tradition, a democratic constitution, an expectation of freedom that Americans still have. We're still shocked and pissed and upset by what's happening. I don't think that we've fallen into kind of a passive compliance, which you often see in states that have been authoritarian for a long time. They expect that that's the reality. I don't think we're there yet. When we do get to that point, we should worry. When we get to that point, you and I probably won't even be discussing it anymore.
No. Well, we will have been taken away, I'm certain. Last question I've got for you: in the coming days, what are you paying attention to? What should folks be looking out for?
Oh, geez. I mean, I don't know. Every day is like...
Every day is like drinking from a fire hose. I get that.
I mean, the thing one thing, look at who's suffering in our country. Look at things like that are going on as the Russia investigation proceeds. Things like DACA, the teachers' strike, stuff like that, because you can get involved in that. In terms of the Russia investigation, the corruption, the money trail, the kind of shattering of any kind of law and norms, things like, Kellyanne Conway getting in trouble for violating the Hatch Act and then having it
Twice.
mean absolutely nothing. Those things are very alarming. Like, keep your expectation that laws should be followed. And at the same time, expect in a kind of pragmatic sense that they won't. But don't forget that that's unacceptable. It's one thing to expect it. It's another thing to accept it. Never accept any of this as normal or right. And so I guess I would just encourage people to keep that in mind.
Yeah, every day someone tweets at me, this is not normal. So I'm reminded of that every morning. Sarah, I appreciate the time.
It's a good way to go. All right.
I appreciate the time. I appreciate the thoughts. Great talking with you again.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
I see them blue for me and you, and I say to myself,
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1974. That was the day that workers at Farah Manufacturing finally ratified its first contract. Workers went on strike in May of 1972, demanding union recognition. Owner Willie Farah had said he'd rather die than have his company go union. It was said that he rode his bicycle through the plant screaming, "Work faster! Work faster!" Management had imposed increasingly unattainable production quotas that bred dangerous working conditions until finally the workers had had enough. The organizing drive to bring the American Clothing Workers of America began in 1969. It spread to 5 plants throughout El Paso, Texas. Workers often met in secret. Though male cutters had initially sought out representation with the ACWA, the workforce was overwhelmingly comprised of Mexican American women. The workers staged a walkout in March of 1972, and many were fired on the spot. By May of that year, the firing of workers at the San Antonio plant for union activity prompted a strike. Declared an unfair labor practice strike, the AFL-CIO began a national boycott campaign of Farah products. The ACWA organized public support and strike relief. Women strikers embarked on a nationwide speaking tour as part of the Justice at Farah Strikers Committee to build the boycott and public support. By early 1974, the NLRB ordered the workers to be reinstated and union organizing to go forward. The contract included wage increases, seniority rights and job security, and grievance procedures. But long-term lessons of the strike proved that the work of organizing could never stop with winning recognition and a first contract. Workers continued to battle for years against quotas, firings, and weak representation in a historically right-to-work state.
not enough. What do you give? A little bit more.
Wow, I gotta tell you, she always, every time we have her on, she just completely blows me away. There is one brilliant woman. Just incredible. And look, every time she's on, I learn something new, because she's right. You know, to keep up with all of the, you know, I do this for a living, and every day there's something you go, oh my gosh, you know, I forgot about this, or oh my gosh, this, I've never heard of this guy. Where'd this come from? And, you know, to be an average everyday, you know, go to work, bust your behind, and, you know, get snippets where you can to try and keep up with this massive investigation is virtually impossible. And the hope is that once Mueller makes the case, the hope is that once all of this stuff really starts to come to light, because Sarah's right. As long as I've been talking to her, and the first time we had her on was before the inauguration. And we've been talking, fairly regularly ever since. And, from the beginning, she was saying, this is what happened. This is what we should be looking out for. This is where the crime has been. And, we've had a bunch of people on this program saying, this is it. And I can't tell you how much email I got, how much Twitter activity. Oh, you're kooks. Oh, you're crazy. Oh, you're off base. No, that couldn't have possibly happened. And now here we are. And it's actually the truth. It's actually coming out. It's actually, we had talked about, as Sarah pointed out, that meeting with Eric Prince and the Russian, a year ago. This was not unknown news. The part of it now is the corroboration that there was somebody there who said, no, it wasn't just by happenstance. It wasn't just two guys in a bar who just happened to be one working for the Trump campaign. I know he wasn't officially on the payroll, and one a Russian operative. Just happened to meet in a bar. I mean, is that a joke? A Trump lackey and a Russian operative walk into a bar. What do you think they're setting up? Well, they're setting up a backdoor channel on how to get around our laws. They're setting up a backdoor channel on how to make sure that, the oligarchy is taken care of. And to be honest, from the summer of the election forward, I've been saying that, the Trump administration, if they get into power, will rob us blind. It will be the greatest heist in the history of civilization. And you look at that tax scheme. You look at all of this stuff coming out of the EPA where we're selling off stuff. You look at all that stuff coming out of the Department of Interior where we're selling off stuff. It's been a fire sale, and we just haven't been paying attention. Oh, wait a second. I'm sorry. It's not that we haven't been paying attention. It's that everything else is just blasting us. Every time you turn around, it's Hope Hicks, it's Nunberg, it's, down the line. And it's all bread and circus. It's all the, hey, look at this. And the hope is that we at some point, and soon, get all the details and all of the dirt. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. When we come back, Justin Duckham's going to be here to share a little bit of the news. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Remember last year when Donald Trump and his congressional trumpeteers bragged that their huge tax cut for corporations would spark a huge corporate spending spree to create new jobs and higher wages? Well, just as they promised, we're now seeing corporate chieftains spending wildly. Only, they're spending their tax cut windfall on themselves, not on boosting America's economy. Mainly, they're pouring billions into a self-serving scheme called buybacks, literally buying up shares of their own corporation's stock. Why? Because reducing the total number of shares on the market increases the value of each remaining share, giving those lucky shareholders a bigger piece of the company's profit pie. Yes, magically, less means more. But it's not magic, it's manipulation. And the top executives doing the manipulating are primary beneficiaries, since most of their pay comes in the form of millions of dollars worth of their corporation's stock. Google executives, for example, are spending $8.6 billion from their taxpayer bonanza on buybacks. PepsiCo is in for $15 billion and Apple for $30 billion. If Trump and the GOP Congress had really intended that their trillion-dollar giveaway of the people's tax revenue be spent for the benefit of all, they would have required the corporate recipients to plow the bulk of the money into our nation's grassroots economy. Instead, once again, our corrupt political officials duped taxpayers into giving away public funds in the name of workers, but they actually stiffed workers, enriched CEOs, increased inequality, diverted tax dollars from urgent national needs, and enabled corporate powers to donate even more corrupting campaign cash to the politicians and party doing this to us. This is Jim Hightower saying, in other words, the Trump tax scam worked exactly as the GOP intended.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show. The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
So interesting scene in Florida today as billionaire Betsy visited the school where the Parkland shooting happened. And not surprising, billionaire Betsy answered a handful of questions. Press conference was about 10 minutes long, didn't answer any real questions, and marched off in what is reportedly a huff. I guess did not even talk to any students, I guess. Only a handful of teachers, I guess. Didn't spend much time with the media, but she did get she got a picture taken, and there's the start. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C. Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. Justin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, great to be here.
So what do you think? You go to a place where a shooting happens, and you don't talk to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, this was strange, and something that a lot of survivors of the Parkland shooting were pretty quick to comment on. They noted that they were expecting at least to get the boilerplate thoughts and prayers from the education secretary, but instead that was not something that was provided. So this raises some serious questions over what exactly the trip was intended for, whether or not she actually got a sense of the school safety measures that need to be taken out of this. And, and a larger thing, just raises some serious questions about the, sensitivity behind this. Trump was somebody who had met with survivors and their families, given not the ones who had been the most critical of his presidency, but, was nevertheless willing to go on camera and take questions on that. And when you have Donald Trump coming off as somebody who's more empathetic and sympathetic to people's views than you, then you know that you are in serious trouble.
Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is, Justin, is she's way out of her depth in this job. I mean, she's an ideologue. She's somebody who wants vouchers and religious schools and this stuff way out of her depth.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear why she was given that position, and of course the fact that you're referring to her as, billionaire Betsy Ross, sort of makes sense in this regard. DeVos, sorry. And, the reason she's there is obviously she is somebody who comes from wealth, is somebody who comes with a certain ideology, obviously a bias toward, private schools and, for-profit education to a large extent. And this is just another sign that, this is somebody who is, frankly, out of touch with a lot of students and teachers. And not just with this. We've seen time and time again instances in which she has had just a rough go of visiting public schools. I guess there was some flap on Twitter because she was using a stock photo of classrooms, one that didn't necessarily reflect the reality of the current age we're living in, and just somebody who's not necessarily coming off as all quite in touch with reality and, sort of living in a bubble at the education department.
Now, as I've said, probably the only thing she knows about public education is she drove past one once and got to see the outside of it because, this is someone I don't want in charge of public education. And fortunately, she's been horribly inept and ineffective. And maybe there's a chance that public education is still around by the time this president's done. Let's move on. The big name today, Stormy. Stormy doing a little suing, huh?
Yes, she is. This was a civil suit filed last night in Los Angeles Superior Court essentially saying that the non-disclosure agreement that was signed by Michael Cohen's Essential Consulting LLC and Stormy Daniels was not, in fact, valid because Donald Trump himself did not sign in on that. That was something that, according to her attorney, was understood by everybody at the time, this notion that it would require a signature from all parties in order to move forward with this, and, has opened up some new questions for the White House and really raised this issue again. Today, there were some tough questions for Sarah Sanders, basically just surrounding the idea of, did Trump discuss this with Michael Cohen, his longtime personal attorney? Was he made aware of the $130,000 that Cohen, at this point, has acknowledged giving to Stormy Daniels, something that he said he was not reimbursed for and came out of his own pocket? And the White House's response was, a weird mix of dodging it, of ducking and weaving, as well as an assertion that, this was settled in arbitration to Trump's advantage and that the Trump team won. Something that, again, raised some questions over what exactly that means, when did that take place, and if it was, settled on behalf of Trump, was the president aware of it again? And we just didn't really get any good answers from that today.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, what is your definition of winning? If you paid someone $130,000, is that winning? And can I lose like that?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
again, Michael Cohen has said, even with claims that aren't true, they still have the possibility to damage the president. Sort of a weird little non-denial, trying to deny it thing. But overall, the White House is continuing to say that this was asked and answered during the campaign. But there was a lot of these issues that were, neither asked in the campaign because they just hadn't have been confirmed or happened yet. We didn't know about the $130,000 being confirmed by Michael Cohen during the campaign, and they certainly weren't answered, not either during the campaign or in the past couple of weeks.
Let me ask you this. Is it possible that, the attorney signed the documents as a representative of Trump, therefore it's the same thing because you have an attorney acting on your behalf? Look, I've done some real estate deals where, I've had a lawyer show up and, sign things over. Is that?
Yeah. And I'm sure that's something that's going to be argued on, the defense of this after this moves forward. But there's also some, concerns raising up over whether or not Michael Cohen was allowed ethically under, the basic standards that apply to being an attorney, to make the payment without his client's knowledge in the first place and to pretty much settle this on his own. And again, we just don't have any answers about that. No. So, there's something fishy going on, something strange. And, overall, whether or not this moves forward, whether or not this fails, this has brought this question into the limelight again. And we are simply seeing from the White House that there are just no cohesive answers that make sense by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Does anyone really care? I mean, we heard all of this stuff during the campaign, all of the, the grabber by the you-know-what, all of the affairs. I mean, he's been married twice before. I mean, there's all of this stuff. None of this stuff seems to stick to him, and it doesn't seem like the evangelicals could care about it whatsoever.
I mean, ultimately, a lot of people don't care, and I will give you that. But at the end of the day, this raises questions over the behavior of the president, raises questions over whether or not Trump is susceptible to blackmail. We know, according to the civil suit, that apparently there is confidential, in their words, still photos and text messages and whatnot. And again, that just raises some serious concerns over whether or not this is a president who can either be manipulated, by an individual in this regard, or could be open to more serious blackmail concerns. So, yeah, it's a fun story. It's always interesting. Every chance to get to talk about the president and the porn star, I, frankly can't think of anything else in immediate history that, really has given us that opportunity. But, there is a chance to make this a serious news story as well. But,
well, I mean, the Bill Clinton era gave me I found out what a humidor was. And, hey, we may get to see a little Trump picture after all.
Yeah, I mean,
this is how low we've gone.
That's included in the NDA. She's saying in the suit that she wanted to come out after the Access Hollywood tape. She's eager to tell her story, and it looks like she has, more than a story to tell here.
I mean, she doesn't even have to say anything anymore. She's already said it. It's happened. She's confirmed it by playing this along. So it is what it is. Good. To be honest, don't care, but we'll move along. So tomorrow, big day. Trump's going to come out with the announcement of potentially putting 25% tariffs on steel, 10% on aluminum. What are you hearing?
So this is going to be taking place tomorrow, probably in the late morning, early afternoon, 1 week after he raised the prospect of tariffs in the first place, and coming just about 2 days after the departure of his chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn. This is something that's causing a pretty significant stir in D.C. There have been a lot of Republicans who have been lobbying the White House, coming out very forcefully against this, trying to get the president to change his mind. But as it stands right now, the top voice in the White House who's resisting this is no longer going to be in his position after a couple of weeks and has therefore lost a lot of his, power within the administration. And Trump is pretty vocal about fucking his own party on this one. Sarah Sanders pointed out a couple of times that this should really come as no shock to anybody, saying that this is something that Trump had campaigned on very heavily during the 2016 campaign when he was on the trail, and is pretty much what people voted for him to bring forward. So not much of a surprise, but now we know that it is going to be moving forward, and we are going to be getting hopefully some additional details, since there's still a lot of unanswered questions over how this is ultimately going to look.
Now, I mean, for me, it's no surprise at all. It is exactly what he ran on. What is surprising is he's actually going forward on it.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that comes up time and time again, this sort of populist protectionist trade policies and whatnot. Usually it doesn't really get much headway in modern electoral politics and whatnot. If you look at other things that have moved forward, it's been pretty successful in the past in terms of, trying to move forward with TPP and NAFTA and whatnot. And this is, an instance in which he is putting his money where his mouth is and, has gotten some praise from labor unions. I believe the AFL-CIO has come out pretty heavily in favor of it. Bernie Sanders campaigned on this pretty heavily as well when he was running in 2016. He hasn't come out specifically against this. And, the polling for it shows that there is a pretty slight plurality of Americans who are in favor of this and believe that this will result in, better jobs. This will result in, the economy growing, helping U.S. manufacturers and whatnot. But nevertheless, you still have quite a few people in D.C. who are warning that this could escalate into a trade war, could, raise other forms of economic catastrophe.
Yeah, and I've heard all those. And for me, the extremes, you throw all those out. The sky's falling. This is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. You throw both of those out. For me, the reality is we're not talking about broad-based tariffs. We're talking about just attempting to salvage what little of the steel industry we still have left. And as someone who does believe in national security and the need to have a steel industry and an aluminum industry, you have to be able to create a space where they can exist. I'm not talking about putting tariffs on everything, not like the duties that Paul Ryan had suggested at the border taxes that they wanted before. But, at some point, you've got to protect vital interests to your national security, which is why I think they used the 232, the Section 232.
I mean, this is something that the president has said largely, if you don't have steel, you don't have a country. It's nevertheless going to be very controversial. We'll see exactly how this moves forward going forward.
Yep.
The president has said that there may be some steps that individual countries can take to get them removed. So we'll see how, strong they stick. He suggested that, Mexico and Canada can get them removed if they renegotiate an NAFTA deal. He suggested that the EU could get them removed if they, remove other tariffs that are against U.S. products. So, there's just a lot of questions over what this is going to look like, and hopefully we'll get some answers to that tomorrow, since, we just haven't gotten a lot of them addressed so far.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I understand tomorrow also going to meet with video game companies to discuss school shootings. Really? We're still on that?
This is kind of a retro move from him, something we haven't really heard since the days of, I guess, Grand Theft Auto. But yeah, he was talking about video games the other day during a meeting with bipartisan lawmakers about school safety, and lamented about video games becoming too violent, saying that video games should probably have their own rating system, something that has, frankly been in place since, I was a kid playing video games myself. So, deflecting the issue, but nevertheless something that he is pushing forward on. We're not really sure who's going to be showing up, whether or not these are going to be titans of the industry, which is pretty big and pretty significant, I guess, when you consider how this has kind of grown into an international industry, or if it's going to be lesser names. But either way, it's a pretty odd meaning for him to be taking, especially, this sort of moralistic view he has about opposing violent video games when, Trump is somebody who trades in violent language himself, and, if you read some of the profiles that have been done on him, also enjoys violent movies, pretty brainless, mindless ones. There's one famous anecdote about how he was watching one, kind of bloodlusty type Van Damme movie and insisted on, fast forwarding through all the exposition, all the story, and just going straight to the fight scene. So,
just the beatings.
Pretty odd there for this one.
Well, that explains how he runs the White House. I mean, all the reports are that it's extremely chaotic, and he's saying, no, not chaotic at all. That's exactly what I think you would expect.
Well, I mean, it's pretty much like Running Man with Terminator, part reality TV show, part Gladiator, but just nobody with, Schwarzenegger's, I guess, intellectual prowess, and that's,
wow.
Obviously.
Wow, there you go. We'll leave it right there. Justin, appreciate the time.
Thank you. You have a good one.
Good stuff. Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day a house fire claimed the life of a true champion for working people. Lucy Gonzalez Parsons was born in Texas. Most of her childhood is a mystery, but it is thought she was born into slavery and was African American, Mexican American, and Native American. After the Civil War, she met and married a Confederate soldier, Albert Parsons. The couple had to leave Texas because they were in danger due to their anti-segregationist activism. They came to Chicago, where they became involved in the city's labor movement. Albert edited The Alarm, a newspaper for working people. Lucy helped to write for the paper. Together, they supported the fight for the 8-hour workday, giving speeches throughout the city. Albert was one of the 8 men tried for the bombings at a workers' rally at Chicago's Haymarket Square in 1886. Although it was clear he was not even present when the bomb was thrown, Albert was convicted and hanged. After losing her beloved husband, Lucy kept up the fight for working people. She was a founding member of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. She continued to speak and write for the causes of women's rights and workers' rights. Because of her activism, the Chicago police called her more dangerous than 1,000 rioters. In 1915, she helped to lead a hunger march of thousands of people in Chicago. At the march, the iconic labor song Solidarity Forever was sung for the very first time.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery for this war is one.
So again, another one of these moments where you're not surprising. No surprise here. New York Times is reporting that Trump asked Reince Priebus and Don McGahn how their testimony went with Mueller. And again, not surprising. This guy doesn't seem to have, there are no boundaries. Just like with the whole Flynn thing. Calling Comey and, hey, can you be okay with my buddy? Hey, take it easy on my boy. because that's how it works. And the best analogy that I've heard someone say is this is like a mob investigation. This is Trump. His name's Don. It's Nectarine Don, whatever you want to call him. He sees himself as the kingpin. He sees himself as the Don. And these kind of coded conversations are not foreign to that world. What I'm waiting for is Rudy Giuliani's name to pop back up as part of the masterminds who put this criminal conspiracy together. And I believe that once all of this comes out, and the hope is that it does, we're going to see a whole bunch of players for decades who were part of this, whose careers we watched right in front of us, who sold their souls to the devil for just a little more power, for just the opportunity to have a little more. We haven't heard from Rudy Giuliani in a while. Someone who actually did prosecute the mob. I wonder if he's looking at this and going, uh-oh. I sure hope so. I sure hope so. Crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. Also, well, we're going to have to get to this tomorrow. I'm, again, out of time. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you're going. As always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow as we talk about, well, more of the Russia stuff as more news keeps breaking. You don't want to miss it. Scott Dworkin's going to be here. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. It's color.